Begin today the Gemara on Daf Mem Ches Amud Beis, 6 lines up from the bottom of the Amud, where it says Ashkechan. So the Gemara here is talking about what it said in the Mishnah, that the shechita of the oila has to be on the tzafin of the azara. So in the beginning of this Daf, on Amud Aleph, it brings the pasuk that it says V'shachat toisa yerach hamizbech tzafayna, by the carbon oila. So now the Gemara continues. In between, the Gemara went into a discussion regarding the source for the shechita and tzafin by the chatas, and now comes back to the oila. Rule by Kachim is, in order for something to be ma'akiv, you have to have a second pasuk. So here, the question is, where is there a second pasuk by the oila? So the Gemara, Ashkechan shechita by the mitzvah. So we brought a pasuk by the oila that it's a mitzvah to do it on tzafin. Kabbalah nami le mitzvah Ashkechan. The fact that you have to do the Kabbalah on tzafin, also, we had a pasuk before that it has to be done mitzvah l'chatchila. So Ashkechan, that we have. Okay, this that the Gemara says now that for Kabbalah by Oila we have a pasuk before that it has to be done in tzafin. It's not actually so clear where that pasuk is. Rashi brings a pasuk, a diak from what the Gemara said before. Tosfos doesn't agree. It's not so simple. It didn't say it 100% clearly in the Gemara before. Okay, either way, the Gemara says weiter, Shechita v'Kabbalah la'akiv minalan. From where do I know that the Shechita and the Kabbalah of the Oila must be on the tzafin of the Azara? If when it comes to the carbon chatos, how do you know that the chatos has to be in tzafin? Because it's learned out from the Oila, as the Gemara brought before the Psukim. Ma'akeves, and by the chatos over there it says a double lashon that it must be on the tzafin. So oila shaba chatos mekeicha. So the oila, which is the source that chatos is learned from it, and it didn't shema'akeves. Definitely by the oila itself, it should be ma'akev that it must be in tzafin. That's the Zevochim. Says the Gemara, there's a refutation to this. Malachatos shekei mechaperes. Chatos accomplishes something greater. It's a kapara. Maybe that's why it has to be b'tzafin. How could you learn the oila from this? Or mechapere, yeah, that it's makim. Mechaperes l'chai v'krisus. It's mechayiv on an aveda b'shegig for a kodesh. Amar Ravina, so Ravina says, "Ho kashile Ravada Barava." This is the point that Ravada Barava is saying when he said this Zevochim. It's not really a regular kind of Zevochim that you can give a pircha on it. What he was saying is as follows: Klum matzinu tafel chomer min ha'ikar. Do we ever find something that's secondary? You learn it from a source, and then what's secondary should be more stringent than what you learn from the source. So therefore, over here, if you see by the tafel that it's ma'akiv, the chatos, definitely by the oila, which is the source, has to be ma'akiv. So it's not really a Zevochim. It's this rule that a tafel can't be mochamer min ha'ikar. Amalei. So now, this new rule the Gemara says here, the Gemara will try to challenge this from a few different places. Do I not find such a concept that something which is tafel should be more stringent than the ikar? But v'harei meiser. When it comes to meiser, you have the produce that part of that has to be brought in some of the years to Yerushalayim for meiser sheni. The hun nifta. If you don't want to carry up the meiser itself to Yerushalayim, so you redeem it, and then you bring the money to Yerushalayim, and with the money you buy food over there in Yerushalayim. So the halacha is, okay, let me explain this again. When the Gemara here says the hu nifda, what it means to say is as follows: what happens if the ma'aser sheni, after it was brought into Yerushalayim, it became tameh? The rule is, once the ma'aser sheni itself is brought into Yerushalayim, you have to eat the ma'aser sheni there. You can't redeem it anymore for money the way you could before you bring it to Yerushalayim. However, if it became tameh in Yerushalayim, then you're able to redeem it. It's learned from the pasuk. Rashi says, "Leisuchal se'esai." Se'es here also means not to eat. If you can't eat it, even if it was already brought into Yerushalayim, you could redeem it. That's the halacha regarding the ma'aser sheni itself. If you brought to Yerushalayim, however, when it comes to the money that you redeemed the ma'aser sheni with, and then you bought with that money produce or food to eat in Yerushalayim, if that becomes tameh, ain't an ifta. You can't redeem it. As the Gemara will bring here, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't redeem it, you just have to bury it. It's tameh, you can't eat it. Ma'aser sheni must be eaten when you're tired. So here you see an example. The ma'aser sheni itself could be redeemed, but the money that you bought the fruits from it, which comes from the ma'aser sheni, it's only tafel, that is tameh. You cannot eat it, and you can't redeem it. Where do we see this? It's now we learned in the Mishnah lakuach bekesef ma'aseh shenitma, that what you bought, the produce you bought from the money that was redeemed from the ma'aseh sheni that became tameh, you put it. So the Tanna Kama says that you could redeem it, and then you buy something else, like by the ma'aseh sheni itself. Rabbi Yehuda, however, Rabbi Yehuda says you cover. It has to be buried. You can't do anything with it. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you see this concept that the tafel is more stringent than the iker. Answers the Gemara, no, Hasam. There, actually, the opposite is true. Loi alime kedushasei lemitvas pidyainei. Because by the Ma'aseh Sheni itself, it has a very strong kedusha. It's the original Ma'aseh Sheni, so that has a strong kedusha that it's able to be redeemed, and the kedusha will go on something else. However, by the produce that you bought from the money that you redeemed the Ma'aseh Sheni with, that doesn't have the same strong of a kedusha. It's only tafel. Therefore, you can't redeem it when it becomes tummy. Okay, but the Gemara asks from another case. V'harei tumura. When it comes to the halacha of tumura, when one says he wants to exchange this carbon with another animal, now the other animal also becomes a kachim. So now they're both kachim. That's the halacha of tumura. Now the halacha is like this: the ilu kachim. When it comes to kachim itself, lechayli abamum kavua. If a person takes an animal which has a blemish that's there and is not going away, and he says that he wants this animal to be a carbon, the hektish does not take effect. What happens in such a case? It doesn't get the kedusha of a carbon. It only gets the kedusha of the value, the money of it. And the relevance for this is, Rashi says, by a carbon that got real kedusha of a carbon, kedusha sagov, even after you redeem it, it's not fully redeemed. You can't do everything with it. There's still certain isurim. You're not allowed to shear the wool from it and just work with it, because it was already kedusha sagov once. However, here in this case, if you makdish it as something that has a mum that's not leaving, it's a mum kavua, so then it's only kedushas damim. It just has a kedusha of its value. You could redeem it and do with it whatever you want. That's the halacha by the kachim itself. But however, when it comes to the tumura, and you're saying that another animal should be tumura, and then what happens? Chayla tumura, chayla. So it takes effect even if you were saying this on an animal that's a balmum kavua. The tumura will take effect, that it will be kedusha sagof, and then if you redeem it, it's not going to be allowed to be used completely. Certain halachas of kedusha sagof will still apply. So here I see the tumura, which is only secondary, it's tafel to the original kachim itself, and by the original kachim, when it's a balmum kavua, it does not take effect to be kedusha sagof, and by the tumura, it does take effect. So it's an example of a tafel having the kayach to take effect stronger than the ikr. Answers the Gemara, no. Tumura mikayach kachim kastya. By the tumura, you're exchanging from the original carbon, so therefore it gets its kedusha from the original carbon, and therefore it's stronger. The kachim mikayach chulin kasi. However, by the original animal that you're makdish as kachim, how does it have its kedusha? It was chulin, and now you made it kedusha. So therefore, it's a weaker kedusha. By the tumuras, so from here, the Samachrein bring a raya that you see that what's really the whole concept of Tumura. Tumura doesn't mean that now the second animal gets its new own independent Kedusha, besides the first. The concept of Tumura is that the Torah says when you say that the other should become in exchange, you're extending that Kedusha of the first to continue and to take effect on the second animal. So therefore, it's getting from another animal that was already Kaddish. Mashenk in the first one, kachim, was cholim before, and you're turning it into kachim. Therefore, it's not as strong. It will not take effect if it's a balmum kavua. The Gemara asks from another case, Hare Pesach. By the carbon Pesach, so where do I see that tafel is stronger than an ikir? Because the hu ain't a ton, the carbon Pesach itself, when it's brought in its time and Erev Pesach, it doesn't require not smicha to lean on it, v'nisachim, the libations that are poured usually by karbanis or tnufas chazav v'shaik. By karban shlamim, you have to lift up the breast and the thighs of the animal. But the ilu ma'isar didei, if you have a carbon Pesach that for whatever reason was not brought out of Pesach and you bring it on another time of the year, was left over, so ton smicha nesachim and tnufas chazav v'shaik, all these details apply that you have to do it by it. So over here, this is a leftover. It's a tafel to the original carbon Pesach, the time it's supposed to be brought. And the halacha is that it has many more things that have to be done with it. And so the Gemara, no, that's not a raya that tafel is more stringent than the yikr. Pesach, b'shar yemois hashana, shlamamu. All year, the Carbon Pesach, as we learned before in the Masechta, we learned from Psukim that after it's not brought in its time, it becomes a Shlomim. So it's Shlomim in its own right, which all these halachas apply. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the original point that it asked. From where do I see a second pasuk that the Carbon Oila, the Shchita, and the Kabbalah Saddam has to be on the Tzafin? So before the Gemara said we learned it from the Chatas, but now the Gemara says V'baisema Omakra Ha Oila. The pasuk when it says regarding the Chatas that you should shech the Chatas in the same place of the Oila, it says V'shachat es Chatas b'mkaim Ha Oila. Could have said V'shachat es Chatas b'tzafin. The fact that it's saying b'mkaim Ha Oila, that second time Ha Oila is b'mkaim Atehei. That means that it must be by the Oila itself. It must be shechted there in its place, which is in Tzafin. So that's the second pasuk. Okay, the Gemara moves on to the next one. So we learned until here the Oila and the Chatas that must be shechted in Tzafin. Asham Minal on the Bayit Tzafin. From where do I know that the carbon Asham also has to be shechted in the Tzafin of the Azara Chsiv? The pasuk says by the Asham, B'mkaim asher yishchetu es ha'Oila, yishchetu es ha'Asham. In the same place of the Oila, that's where you shech the Asham in the Tzafin of the Azara. Ashkechan Shchita. This is the pasuk for the Shchita. Kabbalah Minalan. What's the source for receiving the blood in the tzafin? Because it says in that pasuk right away, it continues V'zdama Yizraik. And this means Kibul Damai Nami Mitzafin. That when it says Ve'ez Damai with that vav, so yeah, it's talking about the zrika of the dam because it says Yizraik. But you can't say that the vav is connecting to the zrika, that the zrika has to be in the tzafin. The zrika is on the mizbeach itself, on the corners of the mizbeach. The Ve'ez Damai, we darshan that also the blood. And we stopped right there. Also the blood, you have to receive it in the same place where you shechted it. Now, Mekabel Atzmoi Minolan, we learned before that by the Kabbalah of the dam, not only does the animal have to be in the tzafin, but the one receiving the blood has to also be standing in tzafin. How do I know that? Answer is because it could have said in the pasuk V'domai, or Domai could have said, and it says Ve'ez Domai, so that extra word Ve'ez teaches that also the kayin that receiving the blood has to stand in tzafin. Says the Gemara.
That's from Kabbalah from Be'ez Damai.
So this halacha that the kohen has to stand on Sofin is only regarding the Kabbalah. By the Shechita, he could actually be standing in the Darim, and he's
from Be'ez Damai.
Right. Yeah, but it could have said Domai. It says S, the extra S. That teaches that not only the animal has to be in Sofin, but the kohen that receiving the blood also has to be in Sofin. Says the Gemara Ashkechol mitzvah. So I have these psukim that are the source that this is the mitzvah lachatchila. La'akiv minala. What's the source that it must be done in the tzafin? Says the Gemara Krach Renikse. There's another pasuk where it says v'shachat es hakeves. The continuation of that pasuk it says v'shachat es hakeves b'mekayim sheyishchat es hachatas v'es ha'oila b'makom hakodesh. It says shecht it in the same place where you shecht the chatas and the oila, which is in the tzafin. The Gemara now that pasuk v'shachat es hakeves is by the Asham Mitzayra. Okay, there's different kinds of Hashamis. That pasuk specifically is by the Asham Mitzayra. So the Gemara asks, the second pasuk of the Asham Mitzayra, is it coming to teach a second time to say that it's ma'akiv, that it has to be done in Safin? But that pasuk, the reason why it's written is because of what it says in this Braise, that there's the Yud Gimel Midrash Ater Nidreshes Behen, right, that we say every morning. What's one of them? Davar Shahaya B'chlal. Something that was part of a general halacha. Then then you see that the Torah says that there's something new here. There's something different regarding this case. Now, if that once you see there's something new, you cannot put it back into the general cloud that it should belong to where it was before you see this new detail. Unless the pasuk itself explicitly says that it's still in that cloud. That's one of the rules, one of the Yudgim Midas Artayr in the Jeshes Behan. Now, what's an example for this? Right over here. This case of the Asham Mitzayra. Why? Keitzad, how does this apply, this rule? The pasuk says, V'shachat es hakeves, b'mkoyim asher yishchat es hachatas v'sa'oila, b'mokim hakodesh, ki kachata sa'asham hu v'gaymer. The pasuk here is saying that this Asham is like a chatas. So why does this pasuk over here have to say that this Asham is like a chatas? It doesn't have to tell you here that this Asham is like the Chatas, because we already learned that before. that the Asham has to be brought on Tzofin, Shechter on the Tzofin, like the Chatas. We know already this halacha. Why is it saying it again? The reason is because we're talking about Asham Mitzayre. We see that by the Asham Mitzayre, there's something new, a new concept that we don't find by the other Karbanis. And that is Bebayin Yad or Bebayin Regel, Bebayin Yamanis. You have to take from the blood of the carbon and put it on his finger, on his toe, on his ear, the right ear. So Yochel, I would think, Lo Yehei, Ton Matan Domim Ve'imurun Legavim Mizbeach. Once I see that there's a Dover HaChodosh, there's this new halacha, so maybe the regular halacha of the carbon that has to be burnt on the Mizbeach, parts of it, and there's blood that has to be sprayed on the Mizbeach, maybe that shouldn't apply here anymore. Therefore, it has to say here, that although there's a Dover HaChodosh, it's Yotza to teach a Dover HaChodosh, but the Torah is beferish putting it back into the Klal, that it's still like the regular chatos with the halachis of the putting on the mizbeach and shechting it in tzafin, and all the regular halachas that apply by the chatos. So ma chatos tuuna matan damim ve'emurim legabe mizbeach, just like a chatos. So you spray on the mizbeach, and then you put the sacrificial parts and burn them on the mizbeach. Af asham mitzayre ta matan damim ve'emurim legabe mizbeach. So the Gemara's question is, I see here that this pasuk is needed uniquely for this point to bring it back into the klal, because it's yotzim and a klal, so you have to teach me that it's compared to the chatos. So how could you say that this pasuk is an extra pasuk to teach me the halacha that by the asham it's la'akiv, that it must be shechter on sofim? And says the Gemara, im kain, because there's still an extra pasuk here, because if you're going to say that we only have one pasuk to teach that it has to be like the chatos, and only one pasuk to say that it has to be sprayed on the tzafin, so then actually this pasuk here by the Asham Mitzayre itself would be enough. Nichtayv b'hai. So let it just say this pasuk over here by the Asham Mitzayre, that it's just like a chatos, which includes the halachas that just said here regarding the blood and regarding the emurim, and that would include also the fact that it has to be shechted on tzafin as well. It could just say this. And the pasuk that we brought before, the first pasuk we brought before regarding Asham, when it says by a regular Asham, by other Asham, that it has to be just like the Chatas and the Ayla, that pasuk is not necessary. I'll just learn out all Asham is from the Asham Mitzayre. So therefore, there's still two psukim here to tell us that the Shchita has to be B'tzafin. Okay, the Gemara says it's not so simple to say that this is true, because this is only a good answer. If we hold like the opinion that says that regarding this klal, Yotza Lildin Bedavra Chadash means when you have a case where the Torah is teaching something new in this case, so Ihu Dulegamar Miklale. So this case over here, the Asham Mitzayre, where you see there's something new in this case, therefore it cannot be learned out from the regular halacha of Asham. And therefore, Legabi, this case, the Torah has to write the details again, that it's like the chatas, we put it back into the klal. Aval, but on the other hand though, klaloi gamamine, the klal of the asham, the regular, all the other ashamis could be learned out from the asham mitzayre. You only say that this case of asham mitzayre, where you have the new detail, that cannot be learned out from anything else. But the other ashamis could be learned out from there. So therefore, the point we said before is true. The Torah could have written the halachas just by the Asham Mitzayre, and you can learn everything out from here. So shapir. So then our answer we said before is right. But if you're going to say that this case, which the Torah says Adover HaChodosh, it cannot be learned out from the general klal, and but it also works in the reverse. The general klal cannot be learned from it. So over here in this case, you can't learn the halacha regarding Asham B'chlal from this individual case of Asham Mitzayre, where the Torah said Adover HaChodosh. So if so, you have to have the halacha by the Asham Mitzayre to say that it's like the chatos, and then you have to have the pasuk by the other ashamais to say that it's like the chatos and the oila, that you spray the blood on itself, and you can't say that it's double, that you learn out one from the other. You can't learn out B'chlal. Says the Gemara, no, this is not a question, because kivin the ahadre, if you actually look into the lashon of the pasuk, you'll see that the lashon of the pasuk, it already says the lashon ki kachatos ha'asham, that chatos is like the asham. It says that already. So ahadre, it already put it back. This point, it has to put it back into the klal. That it already did in this lashon of the pasuk kachatos ha'asham. But then besides that, it also says in the pasuk that b'mkayim asher yishchat es achatas es ha'oila, that you should, that's where you should shech the asham. Why does it have to say that? It already said in the lashon of the pasuk kikachatas ha'asham, so it already put it back. But then it says also explicitly where you should shecht it. But Tzafein, that's actually extra. And therefore we have two psukim to teach me by the Asham that it has to be shechted on Tzafein. Yeah, it's ma'akiv, yeah. Okay, so now the Gemara goes back to a certain detail in the source of this that it says here by the Asham. Because again, what the lashon of the pasuk actually is, the first pasuk the Gemara quoted, v'shachat es hakeves, b'mkayim asher yishchat es hachatos ve'es ha'oila. Why, when it says here this halacha that the Asham has to be shechted batzofin, is the Torah comparing it to two, to the chatas and the oila? Fragt the Gemara, lama li la'kushi l'chatas, lama li la'kushi l'oila. Why are we comparing to both, to the chatas and the oila? Both of them have to be batzofin, so you can compare it to one of them. Amar Ravina, so Ravina explains, it's terech, it's necessary. And here the Gemara is going to basically explain, according to Ravina, this case, this pasuk, is the source of the concept that we had before here in the Masechta, that by kachim there's a rule. When you learn something out from a hekish, you can't make a secondary hekish. David al-Nilma mehekish, you can't learn out a second time from a hekish. So Ravina explains this, that I akshe lechatos, if the pasuk would say that the oila is compared to a chatos, that just like the chatas has to be shechted in tzafin, so too the asham has to be shechted in tzafin, and it wouldn't compare it to the oila, then havamina, I would say that the rule would be that chatas mehechel lamda, not the chatas itself. How do you know regarding the chatas itself that it has to be in tzafin? Me'oila. You only know by the chatas from a hekish to the oila. By that chatas itself, it says that it should be memokim ha'oila. If so, that would mean that David halamed behekish chayzer malamed behekish. You're learning out the asham from the chatas, from a hekish to the chatas, and the chatas itself, its source is from a hekish to the oila. So that would mean that you could learn a double hekish. But so therefore, since that's not true, you could only learn a hekish once by kachim. Therefore, the Torah does not compare it just to chatas. Okay, but now the Gemara says that there's another option though. But he compares it to both, the chatas and oila. You can't compare it to chatas for this reason, but let it compare it to the oila. There's no reason to compare it to the chatas. Says the Gemara, no, if you would have done that, then I wouldn't have a source for this rule. Yeah, it would be a good hekish. To the oila directly would be a perfect hekish, but then I wouldn't have a source for this rule that you can't make a double hekish. Havamina, I would say, davar alamed behekish, chayzer alamed behekish. That really, you could make this double hekish. You learn one thing from a hekish, and then from there you learn yet to another case to hekish. That's still a possibility. You'll say, if so, v'chiteme nikshi akushi lechatos. So why don't we do that here? Why don't we compare the asham to the chatos, and then the chatos is compared to the oila? Why wouldn't we make that double hekish here if you're allowed to do that? The answer is simple, because nichalei the makish leile iker. Because if you have a choice to learn out the halacha of the asham from the original source, which is the oila, and so then that's better. We're not going to compare it to the secondary, which is the chatas that's learned from the oila. Right? So the fact that the Torah compares it to the oila is not a proof that you can't make a double hekish. It compares it directly to the source. But in other situations, maybe it's still possible to say that you make one hekish and you make a second hekish. Maybe you could make a double hekish. So the point is, if the Torah would just compare the asham to the oila, I wouldn't have a source to say this new rule that by kachim, davar halamed behekish, you can't learn out to a second hekish. So what does the Torah do? So the Torah compares it to both, to the chatas and to the oila. And you're wondering, why is it comparing it to both, to the chatas and the oila? That is teaching you, I already compared it to the chatas. But then the Torah goes on to say, but the comparison to the chatas is not good enough because the chatas itself was only learned from another hekish. And from here I learn out that once you learn something from a hekish, then you can't learn that point now to a second hekish. According to Ravina, this pasuk is the source for this concept. Rava Omar, now Rava says, no, the source for this concept by Koch, that when you learn one thing from a hekish, you can't learn it a second time to a hekish to something else. Rava says, Ma'acha, the source for that is here from this pasuk. The pasuk says, Kashiyura Mishar Zevochim. This is the pasuk that's written by the Par Koyim Mashiach. And it's saying that the Par Kohen Mashiach should done like the Shor Zevochim. Okay, so before we see the Gemara here, there's the Par Kohen Mashiach and the Parshas Vayikra. Right after that comes the Parsha of Par Helam Dover Shel Tzibur, okay, which is actually compared to the Par Kohen Mashiach. So here first we're discussing what it says by the Par Kohen Mashiach. Why does the Torah compare it to the Shlomim? Lamai Hilchasa. What's the halacha that is coming to compare the Par Kohen Mashiach to the Shlomim? There's no details that we're learning from there. If it's coming to say regarding the Liseres HaKavod, which I think is the diaphragm and the two kidneys that have to be burnt in the Mizbeach, the Guf Iksiv, it actually says it clearly by the Par Kohen Mashiach itself. It doesn't have to be learned from the Shlomim. So the answer is because this is going to be the source now. The Gemara will explain. This will be the source to say that Davar Alamed Behekish, you can't be Chayzer Alamed Behekish. How is that? Because as I mentioned, what comes after the Parsha of Par Kohen Mashiach? Right after that is Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. Now there's a Hekish that we learn out from Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur to yet a third case. What's that third case? The Soyer of Avodah Zarah, as the Gemara will explain here. So now over here, it'll also be a situation where there's one Hekish and a second Hekish. And what is that? Mishom the boy Agemuri Yeseres HaKavod Shtei HaKloyos Mipar Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. Regarding the Soyer of Avodah Zarah, you don't have the pasuk there. It doesn't say clearly that you have to be makriv that on the Mizbeach. So from where do we know by Avodah Zarah that it has to be brought on the Mizbeach? You learn it out from the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. That's the hekish, the lashon of the pasuk is a hekish that you learn out to the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. Okay, but now the thing is, by the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur itself, the gufei lo yksiv. It doesn't say there in that parsha clearly that the Yiseres HaKavod and the Shtei HaKloyos have to be burnt on the Mizbeach. Umi Par Kohen Mashiach u'degameh. You only learn it out from the Par Kohen Mashiach. Oh, so this is a situation where you have a double hekish. You're learning out the sort of Avodah Zarah from the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, and the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur doesn't have the halacha by itself. It's learned from the parsha before, which is the Par Kohen Mashiach. So it's a problem with this limud. So therefore you have this extra pasuk that it says before by the Par Kohen Mashiach that you should do like by the Shlamim. So that pasuk is not needed by the Par Kohen Mashiach. It's an extra pasuk that we actually use and apply for the Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. The Nehevi command the Kasav Begufei that now we use that extra pasuk that it said before by the Par Kohen Mashiach to be as if it's written by the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. Rashi says this is the rule of M'ena Inyan. When you have an extra pasuk in one case and you don't need it there, so it's being used for something else. So here it's being used to say that v'loy nehavit dava alamed behekish chayzer malamed behekish. And now it's not anymore considered to be that there's a secondary hekish here. Because of that extra pasuk, it's as if the halacha that we're learning out here does say befedish by the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. That's why the Torah is writing that extra pasuk of Kashiyura Mishar Zevochim. Okay, so from here I learn out this concept that a davar alamed behekish you can't be chayzer malamed behekish, because if you could, then you wouldn't need that extra pasuk to tell you that it's as if it says it befedish by the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur itself. But Rav Papa asks Rav v'lichtevei begufei. Why wouldn't the Torah just write this halacha of the detail that we're trying to learn out here? The Yiseres HaKavod and the Shtei HaKloyos, that has to be burnt on the Mizbeach. Let it say itself clearly by Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur and v'loy nakish. And it wouldn't be necessary to make a hekish to the Par Kohen Mashiach to the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. You anyways have this extra pasuk by the Par Kohen Mashiach to make it as if it's written clearly by the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur in order that it shouldn't be a double hekish. No, so write it already clearly by the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur itself. So here the Gemara says a similar point to what it said before. Now, ikasav begufei. But if it would actually say clearly by the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, this halacha of the Yiseres HaKavod and the Shtei HaKloyos that you're learning out to the Soyer of Avodah Zarah, if it would say that there clearly, v'loy akish, and there would be no necessity for a second hekish to the Par Kohen Mashiach, so then, hava mina, I would still think to say that really the truth is, davar alamed behekish, chayzer malamed behekish. That you could make a double hekish. I don't have any proof from here to this rule that you can't make a double hekish. You're going to ask, well, if you can make a double hekish, so why does the Torah have to write, v'chi teime, if so, nakshi akushi? So why does the Torah have to write the halacha of Yiseres HaKavod and Shtei Kloyos by the Par Helam Davar itself, if I could just make a double hekesh, learn the side of Avodah Zarah from Par Helam Davar, and Par Helam Davar you learn from the Par Kayim Mashiach, which is before. Why do I have to have this double hekesh? No, the answer is because Nichalei de Kasvei Begufei Medakeshlei. It's better that you should write it over here itself than to have to make a second hekesh. If you have the option to write it by this place itself, that's straighter, that's better. So therefore, the reason the Torah is writing it here is because it's just better, straight. And there's no reason to make a second hekesh. But I wouldn't have approved that in other situations where there is a double hekesh that I don't dash in that double hekesh. Again, so nichele the kasve begufe mit akeshle akushe. It's just better to write it here itself by the par helm davashal sibra than to have to make a double hekesh. So lahachi, in order for this case to become a source for this general rule that you can't make a double hekesh, what does the Torah do? Kasve va'akshe. The Torah writes it by the par kai Mashiach, and then it makes a hekesh to the par helm davashal sibra. Lememre, in order to teach you now, and the Torah writes an extra pasuk to show that you can't make the double hekesh, the pasuk that we quoted before, Kasher Yura Mishar Zevochim Shlamim, to show don't make this, that you have the double hekesh here, but don't make that double hekesh. Lememre, and now that becomes a source to say that davar lamed behekesh and chayzer malamed behekesh. That once the Torah writes something in a hekesh once, you can't use that as a source to learn out a second time to a second hekesh. This is the two sources, Ravina and Rava, for this rule regarding kachim. The Gemara continues and says, does this rule apply to other kinds of limudim as well? And the siman area is hekesh, gzeir shave, kavachaymer, siman. So the Gemara says, okay, davar alamed behekesh, ein chayzer malamed behekesh. Once you have one hekesh, you can't make now a second hekesh. Imid Rava, imid Ravina. The source is either, as we said, Rava darshan from the pasuk that it says there by the par helm davashal tzibor, or Ravina from the pasuk that it says by the chatas oila by the osham. Okay, so we have the source for that. However, the shaila is davar alamed behekesh, ma'u she'elamed b'gzeir shava. When something was already learned from a hekesh, could I then learn that with gzeir shava? That's the shaila. Maybe this double hekesh is a problem, but if it's first a hekesh and then a gzeir shava, maybe then you could learn out. Says the Gemara, Tashama, so I'll bring you a raya. It says, Rab Nosson ben Avtul Mus Oimer, that minayin leperiche bevegodim shitahira. How do I know when you have a nega in a garment and you took it out and then it spread and the entire garment changed the color, the whole thing? So how do I know that then it's actually tar? Because nema karachas v'gebachas bebegodim. Because the Torah uses this term regarding a nega in a garment. It uses the term karachas v'gebachas. The nema karachas v'gebachas ba'odam, and it uses the term karachas v'gebachas by a human being, and that's regarding a nega that a person has on his head. Okay, not the regular nega that a person. This is called the nega that's in the place of the hairs, say reish or zokon. Okay, now, so we compare those two. Mala halon, just like by the nega in that area of karachas v'gabachas in the human body, on the head or the place where hairs grow. Over there, the halach is parach b'kulei tar. If the nega spreads in the entire area, it'll be tar. Afkan, so too on the garment, parach b'kulei tar. If it spreads in the entire garment, it'll be tar. Okay, but now here the thing is v'hasal minolan. From where do we know regarding this nega of karachas and gabachas in the human body that if it spreads in the entire area that it'll be tar? It actually does not say there itself. Because where's really the source for this concept that a nega that is in the entire body is tar? That's not regarding this nega of karachas and gabachas. That's regarding a regular nega on the rest of the basar of the person, the regular nega. So how do I know that applies also to the nega which is in the area of the body where there's the hairs? That's a hekesh, because the chsev, it says in the pasuk by the Nagayim, me'roishoy v'ad raglo, from his head to his feet. So therefore I say, ve'iskish roishoy l'regel. I compare the head where the hairs grow, that kind of nega, l'regel, to the regel, the other part of the body. A foot, for example. Ma'alalon, just like regarding the other parts of the body, kulei hafach loven is toir. Kulei hofach lovan parach b'kulei toir. If it spreads in the entire body, it'll be toir. Afkan kulei hofach lovan parach b'kulei toir. If the entire body it spreads all over, and he said he's going to be toir. So now, what is the Gemara proving from here? Here I see that the original halacha regarding the nega that's in the place of the hairs, that's learned with a hekish. And then after I have that hekish, I now follow and make a gzeir shaveh from there to a garment. So I see that I have a hekish, and then after that I can make a gzeir shaveh. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says you can't prove from there to the question we're asking, because B'chala Torah Kula regarding other places in Torah Lamedim. You're right. You can say that something that was first learned with Akish, afterwards you could then learn Gzeira Shaveh. Lamed milamed. You could learn one thing that was only learned out from something else, and then you could learn it. You could teach it to something else. Chutz min hakotchim. However, this doesn't apply by kotchim. She'ein don and lamed milamed. You can't learn something from one source and then now use that to learn out to another place. And Rabbi Yochanan says the proof of this would be because the imkein layoymar tzafayna ba'asham. If you're going to say regarding what we're discussing now that there's a hekish, and then after the hekish you want to make a gzeira shaveh based on that. So Rabbi Yochanan says it wouldn't be necessary to say regarding the carbon asham that it has to be shechted only on the tzafin. Why? Because v'teisi b'gzeira shaveh, I can learn it out with a gzeira shaveh, the kotche kotchim, because by asham the Torah says kotche kotchim, and by chatos the Torah says kotche kotchim. Okay, so there's a gzeira shaveh. So then I can learn it out michatos. Mechatois, that is, I can learn it out from the chatos. Why don't I just make that gzeira shaveh? Why do I need the extra pasuk that we learned out before? So the answer will be lav lamemra. Don't you think that the answer is because the davar alamed behekish ain't chayzer alamed b'gzeira shaveh. And once there's a hektish, I can't then learn gzeira shaveh. So over here, in this case, by the chatos, how do I know by the chatos that it has to be shechter and sofin? Because of a hekish to the oila. It doesn't say it by chatos itself. So I can't then make a gzeira shaveh to the asham. So even if by other cases in Torah you could do that, but not by kotchim. But the Gemara says on this raya from Rabbi Yochanan, it's not a proof. The dilma, I could say that mishum dekel mifrach. I could refute this gzeira shaveh that you're making from asham to the chatos. Ma chatos shekem mechaperes l'chai v'krisis. Chatos is much stronger. It has a koyach to be mechaper and chai v'krisis. It's more stringent, so therefore it has to be in soften. So you can't make this gzeira shaveh. Maybe that's the reason. But the Gemara says no. This is not a refutation because kotche kotchim yiseirek sivi. The words kotche kotchim that it says by chatos is extra. You can only refute gzeira shaveh if it's not an extra word. But if it's an extra word, so then by both of them it's extra. So you can't make an gzeira shaveh. Rashi says it's mufna mishnei tzdadim. Once you have extra in both sides of the gzeira shaveh, then ein mishivin allowed. You can't give any pircha. So therefore, this ayah Rabbi Yochanan remains, and the rule by kotchim is once it's learned from akish, you can't then go ahead and make gzeira shaveh. One more detail: the Gemara says davar halamed mehekish. If their source was learned only from a hekish, chayzer malamed b'kavachaymer. You could then learn from there a kavachaymer. What's the raya for this? Meditana debei Rabbi Shmuel, because we had in the previous Perek, Rabbi Shmuel said this clearly. There was a case there regarding the carbon of Yom Kippur that was learned from a hekish, and then the Gemara makes a kavachaymer based on that. So you see there clearly that at least Rabbi Shmuel held that something that's learned first from a hekish, you could then learn a kavachaymer based on that. Fragt the Gemara, but he still asks a question. True, we have here the pasuk kachatas ha'asham that's putting the asham mitzayre back into the klal, and that lashon itself kachatas ha'asham. But how do I know it's putting it into klal for everything? I could say ki ahadre kral legabe matan damim ve'emurim the boy kohuna. Maybe only for the details of the blood on the mizbeach and the emurim, since that's something that needs a kohen, that was put back into the klal. But maybe what we're discussing over here, the shchita and tzafin, which could be done by anybody, not by a kohen as well. So maybe loy mi bay tzafin. Maybe it wouldn't be necessary to have tzafin. So therefore, the fact that the Torah writes over here by this asham mitzayre that has to be done in tzafin is not extra. You can't say, the pasuk had already put it back into the klal. Regarding this, I don't know that it's back into the klal. And so the Gemara no, because in Kain nein nekra ki kachatos hu. I could just simply say that this asham mitzayre is like the chatos. Chatos hu. My kachatos ha asham. When it says this asham is like a chatos. Keshar asham is here. That lashon of ha asham is saying that 100%. It should be 100% like other hashamis, including regarding this detail of spraying it on of shechting it on the tzafin, that is, shechting it on the tzafin. And therefore, the fact that it says explicitly that you should shecht it on the tzafin like the chatos, that's still extra. And therefore, this is the second pasuk that teaches that it's ma'akiv, that it must be done in tzafin.